Greetings and welcome to Flanagan's Ecologic. I am your host, Ted Flanagan, and today I'm joined by my great friend, Robert Fortunato. He's a friend, an awesome musician, a leader in the building decarbonization space. He is currently the president of For Strategy Consulting, which provides leadership and strategy for sustainable innovation and results. Really delighted to have Robert on the podcast. How you doing, man?
Ted, it is such a pleasure to be here with you. It's an honor. So thank you for the invitation. I sincerely appreciate it.
I appreciate your time and I appreciate what you've done, and I appreciate in advance what you're going to say here on the podcast. Where are you right now? Our listeners always like to know.
Yeah, we built the Green Idea House in Hermosa Beach, California. And so it's Southern California. Most people know Manhattan Beach, and we're the next beach city south of the airport.
Oh, how great. And you grew up in Pennsylvania, am I right?
In Philadelphia, and I'm an escapee. My wife and I are both escapees from the weather, essentially from the cold. She's from Minnesota. I'm from Philadelphia.
Yeah. And I know that you went to the University of Pennsylvania.
Correct.
And you were largely working your way through college, if I understand this, playing in bands, and for a while you were selling real estate. I'm not sure what the chronology is here.
Yes.
But UPenn, that's a great school.
I got incredibly lucky. So what happened was I built a band in 1983, somewhere in that range. It dates me a bit. Because in high school, I had played with other band leaders, and you can really, you've played in bands, Ted, so you can relate. And so what happened was, we would play these places on South Street, which was the place to be for up and coming bands. And there was this one guy, Hermes, I'll never forget. He was amazing musician. I learned all of his music, like 2.5 hours worth of his music. And we go to play this place that's on the 3rd floor on South Street. So I had to haul my drums and the PA and everything up 3 floors to play this, and it was like a Wednesday night or something, something like that. So it wasn't a huge crowd, but the place was enormous. We had like 50 people there, but the place could have held like 500 or something like that. And, at the end of the night, we're hauling our stuff all the way back down. It's February. So and we just talked about this, I'm covered with smoke sweat, like it's the worst. And I walk outside and it immediately freezes. So my shirt's freezing on my body as I'm loading the stuff back into the, my car. And at the end of the night, he comes up to me and he says, "Hey, Robert, you guys did a great job, but I'm really sorry. The club owner said we didn't draw enough." And he presses $5 into my hand, Yeah. And I just remember that moment thinking all of this work, all of that, and $5, right? Yeah. And I couldn't believe it. And we grew up poor. So it's not like I could afford to do it for free. I love doing it, but I couldn't afford to do it for free. So I started a band. I felt that the 50s and 60s music was coming back. It's almost like the 80s today, But the 50s and 60s music was coming back. So I started a 50s and 60s dance band that got very, very popular. Ted, you'll love this, because I bought one of the very first Macintosh computers. I realized that this thing could do all of the design and printing of our mailers, and then it could tractor feed all the labels. And so we could do this thing every month, create a postcard and send it to people so that they knew where we were playing and they could show up. So we could pack a club on a Tuesday night, and we got really popular in Philadelphia. It became this kind of thing. We networked in with all of the radio stations. And so they were like announcing that, the guy flying in the helicopter doing the traffic. "Oh, what are you doing tonight?" "Oh, we're going to go see Time and Place at this club." And it just became a thing, It was so amazing. And then the old timers, like the Platters and Sha Na Na and a band called Lee Andrews and the Hearts would come into town, and they would need a backup band. And so we became their backup band. And then they went on regional tours up and down the East Coast to, you might know some of these. Like there was the Valley Forge Music Fair. It was about a 2,000 seat stadium in the round. And so we played those stadiums with these guys and toured with them up and down the East Coast. And so the story that I just told you is the story that I told to the admissions people at the Wharton School of Business. And that's what got me in, essentially. So I just wanted to loop that together.
They just appreciated your, not only your musicianship, but your entrepreneurial spirit and your ability to rouse people up, get them together.
That's what they looked at it and they said, you already know how to do this. Why do you want to come here? I said, I know how to do this for like dozens of people, but I don't know how do you run a 50,000 person organization? I said, that's like the dark side of the moon. I know it exists, but I don't know how to do it, And that was really my driving force for wanting to go to the Wharton School of Business.
So what happened after that? I know from your TEDx talk, which is just incredibly great, by the way.
That's so nice of you. Thank you.
I know from that you did a lot of travel. Was travel the next stop in your path?
I mean, a couple of things combined, in retrospect, right? You never know what's going to be a piece that is actually helpful, right? But I was a juvenile delinquent in high school. And so they sent me to something called VOTEC, and it's a technical school, right? Yeah. For like, minor juvies, basically.
Yeah,
right.
We had it in our high school.
I grew up poor and, and just got myself into a lot of trouble. And so, they sent me there and I learned how to rebuild diesel engines and rebuild cars. And so there's a mechanical piece to this thing that I have a little bit of a genius for. And so really we had this unbelievable professor at tech school. And he said, I'm going to work with you for 2 weeks. And then then you're going to launch yourself, And he kept on referring to the book. You have to read the book. You have to read the book. And the book was a 1,000-page rebuild manual for Allison diesel engines, And we would kind of like, I think it's in, here's some of the specs or whatever. And then at the 2-week mark, he cut us off. Like he literally said, okay, I said it's 2 weeks. Now you're done. RTFB. Was what he said. And he just pointed us to the book. And then we had to figure out how to rebuild these engines based on reading the manual, if you will. And so it really taught me something about how to, do anything based on reading a manual. So there's a technical piece to that. And then I had a family friend who was in the real estate business. And this was right after I got out of high school. And he said, Robert, the interest rates went from 18% to 12%. We may never see 12% again. You have to get in the real estate business. So I got my real estate license and I helped dozens and dozens of people get into from $18,000 to $35,000 row homes in Philadelphia, like really the wrong side of the tracks kind of places. But I realized what a game changer housing is for people, that they could now give something to their kids. They could now be proud of their neighborhood. They could get invested into the neighborhood and improving the neighborhood. And then they could actually have a retirement because they didn't have to just knuckle under ever increasing rents, and it really changed my mindset about housing in general. So those little bits and pieces came through, even past our Green Idea House project. But you mentioned the traveling. My wife and I were working corporate jobs, if you will. But I had taken a backpack through Europe and North Africa and all the way down through Turkey right after college. And, my friends and my mom they thought they would never see me again, like that kind of thing. But I just love the experience of traveling and meeting new people. And I'm an architecture fan. So just seeing, all this, I would take buses out to see Mies van der Rohe buildings and just the incredible things that people had just done with their imaginations. It really astounded me. And it laid the foundation later for Monica and I, my wife and I, to want to take a year off of our corporate jobs before we had kids and really explore the planet. So we saved our money. We sold everything that we had and literally just put everything into storage and took off with 2 backpacks for a year's journey. I found some work as we were traveling for the company that I worked for was acquiring their distributors internationally. And so, I basically sent them a proposal to say, hey, I might be in your neighborhood and I know everything about the company. And if I can be of service, let me know. And so we were in India, in an ashram in India, and I got the first email saying they're starting. So I went down and I did strategy work and merger and acquisition work for 3 months. We turned the business around. We tripled revenue and profitability within a very short amount of time. They wanted me to be the managing director in Australia. And my wife and I looked at each other and said, that would be amazing, but we're not done our trip. We kind of like really made a commitment to this thing, and we loved Australia. And they said, well, just hang out. And then they gave me tickets to go to Japan and do the same thing. And then we went, to Singapore. It was just like this thing that just spiraled.
Oh, great.
And my wife and I joke about it now, but at the time I didn't want to stop. And she's like, I want to go back to the States. I want to have kids, and I don't want to do it in China, and so, at a certain point I just had to stop. And despite the fact that I was having a blast at it, it wasn't as much fun for her because she was the trailing spouse, and she was, planning the next legs of our trip and other things like that. But she couldn't feel like she could fully plug in. Where when I went into town, they knew who I was, they knew what I was there to do, and I had a whole network instantly. When I went into these cities.
So you guys came to California after that, right after that?
So we met each other in California. And then we took off from there. We actually bought our house. We feel lucky that we bought our house in 1995 when the market was like that. And we renovated it for the first time before we left. Then we rented it out. And then we moved back into our house when we came back the first time.
Same place you're sitting right now.
Exactly. Same piece of dirt. I feel so fortunate that we bought this piece of dirt because, Ted, it's just crazy what has happened.
Sure is.
And, not completely unexpected, but, it makes me a little sad for my son, right? Or kids that they can't live anywhere close to here.
Yeah.
It's,
let's dive into your house project, because I think it was when your son was coming along, or maybe Monica was pregnant, that you realized you needed a bigger place.
It was
you
solely
love
based on
the dirt. You love the dirt where you are.
Yes.
You love your location, but you need to do something different. So what was the beginning? Because I think you were, a lot of the lessons that you learned overseas. I know you refer in the TED Talk to using coconut shells as they do in Sri Lanka, and you were looking at your travels in Colorado and Mesa Verde, and thinking about the overhangs and the passive solar design and less toxic materials, and the things that you learned in Denmark. So you wanted to take all these lessons and apply them to a housing project, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's basically it. I mean, we spent 2 years overseas as students of the world and watching how other people built, and sometimes just so simply, like some of the lessons that are in my TED Talk of Mesa Verde is really incredible. I mean, if we went there on I think it was close to June 22nd, and to watch how well that overhang worked to shade that whole entire structure, it's mind blowing. And there's plenty of other caves all around that canyon that they could have chosen, right? It's not like there wasn't another hole in the rock. There are plenty of other places. They knew the south facing with an overhang, and we've lost that. We've really lost that mentality. Right. Especially with, as with air conditioning and everything else, people are building glass buildings with no concept that there is a south and a north and an east and a west. And it's crazy. It's really crazy.
So what was the plan for the house? You just needed more space, it sounded like.
Yes. We needed about 800, I stepped it off, and we needed about 800 more square feet. And Google had just bought SketchUp at the time. And it was a mind blower because they could do shading studies with this little thing. So I made a little box, little rectangle. I pulled up the box, and then I put an overhang on it. And then I could see, based on the time of the day and the time of the year, how the sun came into the building based on the orientation of this little box. And it changed everything. It set off the design for the house. at that point.
And you were told by, I think, your first architect, you were told, this is not going to work. This is not going to fly.
Yeah. Well, he took, not before he took our money. That's an important part of the story. Yeah, he took a lot of our money. And I just wanted to hire the best architect that we could find, the best green architect we could find, and just move on with my consulting work, because I was doing very well making lawyers richer. Like that was, it turned into all the merger and acquisition work that I did. I transitioned into working with lawyers and, really highly paid professional services firms. And that tends to pay really, really well. So I was happy doing that. And I just wanted somebody else to take the accolades and do the work. But at a certain point, he just looked at me and said, I think this is all a bunch of bullshit. And I was like, holy cow. I mean, Monica and I were just devastated at that point. And we considered ourselves really sophisticated consumers of this product. Yeah. And if this is what we were getting, what's everybody else getting? And as you know, Ted, there's so many bad greenwashed projects and systems out there that it really bothered us. And we had to, sort of retrench and figure out, I just needed to put my boots on and actually finish the design ourselves and general contract the thing myself to actually get this done and prove that it can be done. Yeah. And so other people can do it as well.
One of the most intriguing parts of the story is how you brought in the community, right, to help you with all this. And talk about that, the repurposing of materials, et cetera. I mean, it's just fascinating how you had people that were in your community that could help you do this project.
It was really a beautiful thing. And you know this all too well, having done 228 podcasts, right? It is the community that is so powerful. And oftentimes we look at the people, that we think have tin hats, right? But in my experience in doing innovation work, you have to search out the crazies, the people that, other people think are absolutely nuts, and really understand where they're coming from. And just with empathy and a sense of understanding, really try to figure out what they know that other people might not know, that might be valuable to what you're trying to do. And I hunted them down, and many of them were really angry because they tried to do a project like mine, but they were really angry at the city. They were really angry with the utilities. They were angry with all of these entities that they felt kept them from doing what they wanted to do. And it was a lesson for me to just say, you know what, instead of fighting all these entities, let me build a coalition, because all these entities could learn from this project, and we could, in exchange for their services and their help, we can get something that could, supercharge our project at the same time. And that's the spirit we went into. I didn't want to be one of those angry people at the end of the project, right? I just wanted everybody to benefit from it. And then I wanted to step away from it, quite frankly, and go back to my regular job. That was my intention, is just to make an open source project. Everybody could benefit, everybody can learn from, and then I could just go back to my regular job. That was my intention.
Yeah. And the whole thrust of decarbonization, I think, and now we're calling them net zero homes, but decarbonization came about because you realized that there was black soot on your windowsill, and you're having a child, and you wouldn't want your child, nor you or your wife, to be breathing in these pollutants. And so you realized that the traditional homes in America and probably around the world we're sort of self-polluting, right? We sort of seal up our houses, and then we're burning, we're cooking, we're having a furnace going, our cars coming into the garage. And you decided you wanted to get rid of all that, right? And just have a carbon-free building. Just
simpler, better, healthier, and we were just talking about this in advance of our, we acknowledge when we get sick, but we don't really celebrate when we're well. Right? Yeah. We just talked about this. And unfortunately, we put so many toxins in our environment. And I tell the story, I have a couple of tubes of caulk. It's building glue that my builder, my framer said he needed. He said, hey, we're at the point of putting your floors down. If you don't want them to squeak, I need glue, And I said, what do you normally use? And then I checked the specs of this stuff versus, how many grams of particulates could be in it for, the green building standards. And this met the standards And so I bought a case of it, and I went and I delivered it in the morning because I was buying everything for I was the general. So I was buying everything. I was doing everything for all these guys. And so I went and I said, hey, here's the case of stuff. And okay, I'll check back in with you this afternoon. So I come back in the afternoon, and I walk by the trash can, and the smell coming, the toxic smell coming on. And I called up to one of the guys, and he said, hey, and this guy had this glue all the way up and down his arms, like under his fingernails, like next to his eyes. You could tell he's scratching his eyes. And I called the framer over, and I said, what the heck is going on here? Like, your guys are covered in, I said, how do you get that stuff off? He said, oh, we use solvent.
Yeah.
I'm like, you use solvent to get that toxic stuff off of your skin? Yeah. And he's like, oh yeah, this is just what we do. And I'm like, no, you guys need to go home right now, wash that stuff off. I don't want you using any more of it. And he said, no, I got a schedule and blah, blah. I say, I will pay you. I do not want that. Like, I looked at the back of the tube, and it says causes heart disease, kidney damage, not to be used with pregnant women. Like, it just went on and on and on when I looked at it. And it's the solvent in the thing, right? Yeah. It's that nobody talks about, that's not even included in the particulate matter calculation, which is crazy to me. So I found this other stuff that had none of that, no solvents, no toxins, and it was actually less expensive. I'm like, it makes sense that it was less expensive on one hand, right? Because you don't have to carry all of the toxins forward. On the other hand, the reason why many of these chemicals exist in the first place is some very, very smart chemists and economists who were working for the oil industry. You probably know the story. And I won't mention the professor's name, but he's very well known locally, within 100 miles of here. Professor invented this strategy, basically to say nothing is trash. Nothing is trash. And so he found all the toxic stuff that the oil companies had to pay to get rid of, and he found uses for them in consumer products.
Mm-hmm.
It's so sad.
No twisted.
Yeah. So
and then natural gas. You didn't want to bring natural gas into your new home. Is that right?
I mean, anything to do with fossil fuels in the fossil fuel industry, at that point, I had written off. I said, there's a new way to do this, and it's clean energy, and it's solar, and it's wind, and it's less expensive, actually, And at that time, it was right at the burgeoning point of the tipping point, right? Was it actually less expensive? And people were saying, well, you're not counting in all the energy that it costs to make those solar panels. And we know now, it's after 6 years, that's all paid back, right? Yeah. And the panels last for 40 years. So, it's just a moot argument. We know definitively now it is definitively less expensive on the first costs and the ongoing operations and maintenance costs.
And that's for the entire building you're talking about. You were able to rebuild your house at lesser cost, and then obviously the ongoing operating costs are dramatically reduced, right? And it's healthier, and you proved that.
Beyond a shadow of a doubt. And and one of the entities I was working for insisted we model the project several times, and I just thought they were being thorough. One of the guys left that company and contacted me, and we were friends at that point. And I said, hey, how's it going? He said, great. And I just want to let you know I'm leaving and moving on to the other things and blah, blah, blah. He said to me, why we modeled your project so many times? And I said, well, you guys were just being thorough, right? And he said, no. We didn't think it would work. We counted on it not working. We needed the proof that it didn't work so that we could continue our business plan exactly as we had lined it. And your project caused us to revisit our strategic plan as a company.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the kind of impact we wanted to have, right?
It's awesome. So you reduced, I've got just some statistics here. You reused 97% of the materials that were in the old house. You had 70 collaborators, excuse me. 5,000 people came to visit the house, or probably many more now at this point. You had lots of press. You reduced energy consumption in the house by 70%. You're overproducing on electricity. You're powering your electric car. Reduced soot by 100%. Capped the gas line. Reduced water. Created a thermal chimney. You won the Green Leadership Award for LA County. Good stuff, Robert.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you. Coming from you, that's a huge honor. Ted, you've done so much in your career and in your life that is to be lauded. So coming from you, that's a huge honor. Thank you, my friend.
Well, no, it's just such a great case study. And now you're teaching. You do trainings for Southern California Edison. What exactly are those trainings?
Yeah, it's decarbonization training. We consider it quite unique. One of the guys who was actually the president of Merlex Stucco manufacturer, I hunted them down because they had lower carbon cement, lower carbon stucco products. And we became friends. And he said, "Hey, I'm really interested in this modeling, and I'm doing these other things." And he sold the company. And he went to work doing energy modeling. This is Nick Brown. You probably know Nick. And he said, I'd love to do the same thing that you've done on your house, on our house, And so my wife and I gave him a 2-hour tour, him and his wife, a 2-hour tour, just showing him every nook and cranny of how the building actually worked. And then he went off to do his project. It's called the Net Zero Nest. And at the end of it, he ended up with gas, and I was a little taken back by it. And I said, "Nick, what's the deal with the gas?" He said, "Well, if you look at the energy code in 2013, you can't actually build with no gas." I mean, the energy code had gone so far the other way. It was crazy. And I said to, and they were offering incentives, I said, the gas company's offering incentives, and the energy code has put their thumb on the scale for putting gas in the. I said, this is really wrong. So a bunch of people got together to reverse that, as you know. So the energy codes now are the other way, and they do support decarbonization. But I was so aghast by that. I realized how much policy has an impact on what we do. I had just proven that you don't need the gas line. And they enacted the code the year after we came out of the ground that says you do need a gas line. I mean, that's how we really have to stay on top of policy issues. I never wanted to be political. I really never want to talk about politics. But these kinds of things lead me to want to make sure that somebody's not putting their thumb on the scale for their own, lining their own pockets is essentially what's happening.
And so the trainings are is it all residential construction?
We do residential, commercial, and multifamily. And so, sort of coming out of my project, I had this weird, again, I just wanted to go back to my consulting business, Ted. I hate to say that. I mean, it's so much more profitable, than the other stuff that I do. But a couple of things influenced me to want to do this other thing. One, my son was getting old enough. He knew what a policeman did. He knew what a fireman did. He didn't really know what his dad did.
Right.
And telling him that I make lawyers richer was insufficient, to say the least. Right. And so to find something with more meaning, and this obviously was having more meaning. And then, a neighbor of mine down the block said she saw our house and she wanted to put solar on. And I said, "Great, let me, I'm happy to help you for free. Just like, I would just want to make sure it's done right." She said, No, I've got this great contractor. I totally got it. 4 months later, I saw her and she said, "Robert, that solar really doesn't work. It's really, we put the solar on. It really wasn't worth, our bill is just a little bit less." And then I did a satellite screenshot of her roof. They put the solar on the wrong side, Ted. They put it on the north side. I'm sure you've seen it. So I got actively involved. I've helped probably 50 or 60 families put solar on their house the right way and make sure to save them money. And, because there's something we call the beach tax here. If you live near the ocean, they try to charge you double for, for nothing. And so I was helping families. And then our local school just won a bond, they passed a bond. And I went into the superintendent's office. I said, there's money to do what we did on our house for big school, schools like this. And she literally laughed in my face, Ted. She said, do you know how much trouble we just had passing that bond? I'm not doing anything out of the boundaries. We're just going to build a building, And I said, listen, you don't have to do anything. Let me assemble a team and we'll see what we can do. We got her $500,000 and they built one of the first net zero energy, zero carbon case study schools in the country, So this is all possible, right? It's all possible, 10 years ago. And from there, other people were sort of dragging me back in the space saying, affordable housing could, they need to do the same thing on affordable housing that you did on your house. So I started auditing affordable housing complexes, the existing buildings, because I want to understand, what are you currently building? And then how can we impact the pipeline of buildings that are coming online as a result of understanding the portfolio and the productivity of the portfolio that you've built. And the stuff that I saw, it made me cry, because these were LEED platinum buildings that would never work in their lifetime. They spent millions of dollars, and somehow at the 11th hour, I'm sure you've seen it too. At the 11th hour, somebody said, "Oh, this won't be a problem to change. We'll value engineer this thing in a way it'll be great. It'll be great." And it makes me cry to see some of these buildings that they built, and that's why I became even more passionate. And so I assembled the team, and we won $1 million grant to design some of the most affordable housing complexes. And so we built this team, and if we did well on the project, we would win another $9 million to actually build the buildings. So we won both of those contests. This is, about 2 years ago, we started on that process. And so, as much as I can be helpful to just from a very practical sense, direct these projects. As you know, it's just got to be practical.
So
has to actually work. And that's what I'm most focused on.
How awesome. Robert, thanks so much for being on the podcast. Thanks for this great story and being a model, not just the case study, but being a model citizen, asking the questions, questioning authority, and putting all your positive energy. You're one of the most positive people I know, putting your positive energy out there for the benefit of us all. It's really great stuff. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ted.